JP, good morning. I guess the unfinished business at this date, as we know very little about whether or not there'll be a DH, when the league is going to start. We're assuming it's going to be on time because all directions are pointing that way. But how about the unsigned players and players that have been long rumored on the trade block that are still property of their current employer? Let's start with free agents and one of the big fish, JT Realmuto. What's the latest?
Well, good morning, Matt and Harold and Lauren. Here is the update on JT Realmuto as of yesterday. Report from Robert Murray that, yes, the Atlanta Braves have jumped into the competition to sign JT Realmuto. Certainly surprising a lot of people around the game because the Braves have and had a catcher in 2020 in Travis d'Arnaud who had an OPS above 900 and is signed for the very reasonable sum of $8 million for 2021. So, very interesting, Harold. And so the question now comes, are the Braves involved here to bid up the price for their division rival Phillies to ultimately re-sign Realmuto, or do the Braves have some very serious designs on signing Realmuto and then potentially trading d'Arnaud elsewhere? It'd be a little bit odd, I suppose, if the Braves sign Realmuto and then try to trade d'Arnaud to the Phillies. I wouldn't really expect that. But that's the situation that we find ourselves in right now. There's not a ton of teams, we believe, who are poised to spend top dollar on a catcher. But you start to think about the secondary options here. And if the Braves were to sign Realmuto and then trade d'Arnaud, teams like perhaps the Angels and the Blue Jays would be interested, one assumes, in Travis d'Arnaud. So it really is a cascading effect, and I was certainly surprised on some level by the report by Robert Murray yesterday. But I think the key thing here is Travis d'Arnaud was only signed for one more year, so you could certainly see that situation unfold. And what a blockbuster move it would be by Alex Anthopoulos to steal away JT Realmuto from the division rival when so many people around the game believe the Phillies have been and are perhaps the front runner to sign JT Realmuto right now.
Scandal theory alert. Is there a chance, and I was talking about this with our coordinating producer Mark Capalbo before the show, is there a chance that Alex Anthopoulos and the Braves are just trying to muddy up the works in Philadelphia and tack on a few shekels on the price of JT Realmuto if he decides to stay in Philly? Like, do teams do that? Am I reading too much into that, or is there real interest here?
I don't know the benefit. I know there's a threshold that you get to and all that stuff, but I don't know the benefit in doing that. I heard JP talking about that as well. I don't see.
You don't think they're brokering in that kind of reindeer game?
I think we're dealing with the shredder right now, really, without emotion or bias. Look, I want JT Realmuto, nice season from d'Arnaud, but if I can get the best catcher in the game, I'm getting the best catcher in the game. And I think what's happening, JP, we'll come back to you, I just think the market has brought people back. If we're looking at Springer's deal a year ago, 2 years ago, we're looking at close to $175 million. That's $150 for six. You look at the deal that, what's his name, DJ LeMahieu. 6 years at 90? The market is bringing JT back into the conversation.
Even if we're talking about $100 million as a floor, I think, for JT Realmuto.
But it's not 200. 2 years ago, we were saying, hey, this is a $250 million catcher.
Uber conservative figure, $100 million floor. Can the Braves absorb another $100 million deal? Can they? I know they got Acuna on the cheap. They got Albies on the cheap.
They stole those guys. Come on, you're talking about those two alone are $200 million players.
How much more dough is there for them to spend? This is the big question, JP.
Well, Matt, here's the three-dimensional look at this, because one name you're not seeing right there on the Braves lineup is, of course, Marcell Ozuna, who is still out there. And so if you're not going to re-sign Ozuna, here's one thing that you could theoretically do. Let's say you sign Realmuto for around that nine-figure deal we were talking about, $110 million, whatever it might be. You sign him. d'Arnaud, as someone who had an over 900 OPS as a catcher, is more than fairly priced at $8 million. you could trade that contract. Someone would take that deal. Let's say it's the Blue Jays. Let's say it's the Angels. Both of those teams have outfield players to spare from a standpoint of whether it's a Lourdes Gurriel Jr. with Toronto, Randall Grichuk with Toronto. When you think about the Angels, maybe it's a Jared Walsh. I would doubt Joe Adell, but they have some outfield depth there. And so that would then solve and replace, maybe not at the same level of production as a Marcell Ozuna, but it would bring back that left fielder that you want. So if you're Alex Anthopoulos, it's not just the move of Realmuto, but also the player you'd get back by trading d'Arnaud. And those two teams I'd watch very carefully, Toronto and the Angels, to maybe bring back, and don't forget, okay, one of the key things to not forget here, the Braves-Angels relationship. Perry Manassian is one of Alex's best friends in the game, of course, worked for him for a long time. And that's where if Alex is able to bring in the catcher in Realmuto and then trade d'Arnaud, Perry Manassian, one of his best friends in the game, has multiple outfielders to move, where that could then satisfy the Braves' need for a left fielder as well.
Good stuff. Good context as always.
Good.
I don't know. I just think the Braves thing's a bunch of smoke.
My wife smoke, so it makes me smoke.
Not that kind of smoke. And Lauren's over there going, he just said that so he could play the sound.
Of course.
Am I right?
Right. Hey, let's talk about Kris Bryant and what the latest is there, because we've kicked this around every few days. Will he or will he not be a Cub for the remainder or the duration of the 2021 season?
Well, Matt, a very interesting question. And the new news on this was Bryant's comments to a recent Barstool Sports podcast, on which he acknowledged that baseball was not as much fun as it had been in the past for him during the 2020 season. And even going back further than that to 2019, the trade rumors and the rumblings that have gone on for a couple of years, he acknowledged, and I'm paraphrasing here, had gotten to be a little worrisome and burdensome for him, where maybe the game wasn't quite as joyful as it had been in the past, hearing the rumors, of course, one after another. And so it does beg the question here, now that Bryant and the Cubs have settled at that $19.5 million figure for 2021, now there's a little more certainty as to what his price tag is for this year, and you start to wonder, where does that next trade fit come, if in fact trading him to a new place might unburden him perhaps of some of the worries that he's had the last couple of years. And one team that I'll mention right here, the Toronto Blue Jays. I was told recently that there had been at least some conversation between the Cubs and the Jays on a Bryant trade. And what's happened here in the last week or so is that, of course, the Blue Jays tried to add Michael Brantley to the George Springer expenditure, and of course that did not work. So the Jays still have some money to spend. Yeah, exactly. Noted. And so the Jays still have some money to spend, and third base, I think, is a key thing here. Remember this: Vladimir Guerrero Jr. went down to the Dominican Winter League this past couple months to work on both his offense and defense. Offensively, the swing was good, according to what I was told, but defensively, he played 8 games there and made 4 errors. Making an error every other game, as we know, is not conducive to Major League play at that position. So the third base concerns for Vladdy are real. He's probably going to be a first base DH. And so if you do not have a third baseman and you're the Blue Jays, Kris Bryant, you think about that ballpark. What a bounce back year that could be in that ballpark, assuming, of course, the Jays are able to play at Rogers Center this year. Or even if it's Buffalo, goodness, what kind of numbers could you see there for Kris Bryant? It does seem to me that Kris Bryant going to the Blue Jays, a tremendous bounce back opportunity, both production-wise and perhaps mentally as well, for the former NL MVP.
What the heck? I say we just go for it. Let's report it. You know,
as well.
We whiffed on Mike Brantley.
Fake news.
We had a lot of fake news about the Blue Jays this week.
I was sitting at home seeing things flying around like crazy. Like, come on, where is it?
We're reckless this week. Hey, before we let you go, you talked about Marcell Ozuna and the uncertainty around the DH position for 2021. For that reason alone, we've heard very little of where Nelson Cruz might sign for the upcoming year.
Interesting that he, of course, is still out there, and he's been one of the most prolific home run hitters in the game over the last decade. Hector Gomez indicating from the Dominican Republic here the last couple of days, that actually the White Sox have checked in on Nelson Cruz as
this
well.
Is one of the
in addition
great
to
players in the game.
The Minnesota Twins. Oh, that is so true, Harold. So true. And I would say this too. The National League uncertainty certainly has had an effect on Nelson Cruz, but I was told by a source in the last several days that still some National League teams are involved on Nelson Cruz. And one team that I'm watching carefully here, guys, that we have to see something from here as we get towards the second half of January. What are the Cardinals doing? Because they still have not signed Yachty. They still have not signed Wainwright. They're a team that, when you look at it, the mechanics of that roster, they have the flexibility, I would say, to be one of the handful of teams that could actually trade for a Nolan Arenado. I'm not saying that it's going to be Nelson Cruz or even a Marcell Ozuna, but the DH equation there with the Cardinals, gosh, they've got to do something. And so to me, whether it's a bat like Cruz or Ozuna, or maybe just bringing back Yachty and Wainwright, the Cardinals are one team that I'm really curious to hear from here in the days ahead.
Yeah, we are too. The radio silence out of St. Louis, and maybe Nelson Cruz moving out of Minnesota.
How far is your home from Minnesota?
It's going to be a little farther if he leaves there.